Welcome everyone to NeueHouse. This is actually, he's gotten a little bit ahead of himself. This is our second of this collaboration of the series, Collecting for Everyone, a new partnership between Fotografiska and AIPAD. Sophie, I'm thrilled that we're on this panel together. We've been talking about this series for years, I think since our first coffee at Fotografiska New York when I had just gotten the AIPAD job. So I'm really excited that we can have this conversation together. My name is Lydia Malama Johnson. I'm the executive director of AIPAD. For those of you who don't know who we are, we're the Association of International Photography Art Dealers. The organization is a community of 95 galleries from around the world and that specialize in fine art photography. The organization acts as a voice and a central pillar in this industry, and we are probably most famous for our flagship event, which is the photography show every year in the spring, and in 2025, it'll be at the Park Avenue Armory, April 23rd through the 27th. In your gift bags, you'll find a little flyer about the fair, and we hope you'll join us. Tickets are now on sale. This collaboration with Fotografiska is part of AIPAD's ongoing initiative to introduce photography collecting to new audiences. I'd like to thank Sophie, her team, especially Wendy, Jordan, and Kayla, and AIPAD's own team, Irene, NJ, and Alex, who are here with me today. Thank you again also to Carl and NeueHouse for hosting this event. Our next talks will be February 12th, March 11th, and April 12th, and we'll cover topics ranging from collecting ephemera to chasing the elusive, unique, historic print. Today's discussion will focus on collecting photographers in the beginning of their career and how to approach this part of our industry. I'm joined today on this fantastic panel by three experts in the field, and I will now introduce them briefly. Sorry, this is my first moderation. I'm very nervous. Okay.
We're all friends.
I'll start with you, Josh. Josh Chuang is the Director of Photography at Gagosian. He's a curator, writer, and book editor. Prior to Gagosian, he held curatorial positions at the New York Public Library, Center for Creative Photography, and Yale University Art Gallery. He's organized exhibitions at the Museo Reina Sofia, the Jeu de Paume, LACMA, Walther Collection, Photo Museum Winterthur, La Balle, and the Philadelphia Museum of Art, among other venues. His past projects include works with Judith Joy Ross, Turin Simon, Anna Atkins, and Robert, which he's worked with multiple times. Sam is a professor of politics and social science at Sarah Lawrence College and concurrently a faculty fellow with NYU's Center for Advanced Social Science Research. He's also a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, where he focuses on questions of related civic and political culture and American ideologies. Sam's writings are widely published across the New York Times, Washington Post, American Interest, and the Chronicle of Higher Education. And he's authored several books on a variety of topics, including public opinion, Congress, and religion. He's presently working on 2 book projects exploring partisanship, polarization, and society. He joins us today in his role as a collector of emerging photographers with a deep interest in the art market and a keen insight into how younger generations can enter the collecting realm of photography. Last but certainly not least, Sophie Wright is Executive Director of Fotografiska New York. Prior to Fotografiska, Sophie led Magnum Photo's cultural department internationally across their offices in New York, London, Paris, and Tokyo, and has worked with Elliot Erwitt, Bruce Davidson, Martin Parr, and Susan Meisalis. She conceived the Live Lab, a series of experimental residences across the globe, and has placed significant bodies of work by Magnum photographers into museums, such as the Tate Modern, Getty, and MoMA. From 2020, she mentored over 100 emerging photographers, our focus this evening, during the pandemic via her online program, Photo Chat. In 2021, she created the programs with Leica and oversaw and co-curated the critically acclaimed exhibition, America in Crisis. She's the co-author of Light on the Riviera, which we were discussing earlier, the history of photography on the Côte d'Azur. With those introductions, let's begin. This first question or prompt is to all of you. To begin this conversation and to really get into what we're talking about today, let's define emerging photographers for the audience. When you hear this term, what do you think? Anyone can begin.
Should we go in order? Or?
Okay, I'll go first.
And I think we all agree that we're probably not going to agree entirely on this, because it's not really defined by age, which I think is something that gets a bit mixed up. But it's really, for me, it's about photographers that are at the point where they've got a distinct perspective. They've got one or two bodies of work that really are taking shape, but they're maybe are on the cusp of publishing a book, or they've been exhibited in group shows but really haven't had any major kind of solo exhibitions. And I wouldn't even say that they necessarily have representation. So they can potentially be really quite young from that perspective in their careers. But that would be my punt at what emerging photographers are.
Yeah, when I hear that phrase, I think more about how that artist is perceived rather than how they might see themselves. So it's a lot about how known they are in the mainstream, in the market, and so it's a question of emerging from what.
I couldn't agree more. I think that's exactly right. It has nothing to do with age, but it has to do with where they are professionally and then intellectually in terms of how they see their work. I have a friend named Dan Ambrosi. Check him out. He's going to be showing at Christie's in a little bit. I hope I get his age right. He's close to 60. And he left his old career and started about a decade ago. And he's just beginning to break through. I think after the Christie's show, he may not be emerging anymore. I think he will have been emergent. So collect him now if you have a chance. But no, I think it's about maturity as a process, not age whatsoever.
So across those three different definitions, I think the one thing we can or all agree on is that it is something that is still to be discovered by the mainstream. And when we think about how emerging photographers and collecting emerging photographers come to be, what are those avenues? How do you find them? How do you purchase them? How do you support them? How do you patronize them? So Sam, I'd love to start with you. As a young collector, what's the beginning narrative of your emergent photography collection?
So I don't feel very young, especially when I'm on the ground with my 1-year-old. But I see it as a partnership, believe it or not. I mean, thanks to social media and these fabulous devices, they have a lot of downsides, and we keep hearing about those and why we should put them away in schools. But on the other hand, they can connect us to people all over the world. There's a photographer over in the UK named Kit Young. I was introduced to him through an AIPAD dealer, actually. And Kit is great on social media, so we began to chat. Over the last couple of years, I've picked up 3 or 4 of his pieces, and not to talk down to him at all, but I know every time that happens, he's very excited. I'm certainly not a patron in a large sense, but in a small sense, I'm saying, I love this work, keep going, keep doing it, keep producing the good work. And what's been really special about trying to collect emergent photographers today is that it's not just you're buying a print for the sake of the beauty of the print and the value of the work in and of itself. I think you can create a relationship with these folks, and it takes on a whole nother dimension. You can help nurture their work. They can bring joy into your life, into your world, and you can enjoy the work together. But it's really, in many respects, a collaboration, as bizarre as that sounds. I'm not out there in the dark room. I'm not helping him shoot per se, but we talk back and forth, and I feel a deep connection to him, and then an even deeper connection to the work. The work takes on a story, and to me, that's why supporting and trying to nurture and patronize in the best of ways these emergent photographers has been really rewarding. And again, just so much more meaningful than just buying an object in and of itself.
And in your conversations with Kit, when you kind of speak about what you admire about the work and what you're interested in parts of the work, what is that discourse like in terms of feedback, or have you spoken to him about what he's working on and kind of understanding that process? Has he been your teacher in that? Of course, the dealer that you mentioned is Michael Hewlett of the Hewlett Collection, who's one of our associate members. I have to shout that out. But what is that process like? But is it between you and Kit, with Michael? Kind of what is that like?
It depends. Sometimes it's one-on-one. Sometimes it's 2-on-1. Sometimes it's actually just talking about life, careers, and yes. So his piece is here. That's Rue de Rivoli. I just loved that. It felt like a Louis Stettner sort of piece, but more modern. I had gone to Paris a couple of years ago with my kids. It was rainy. It was cold. We were right over there by the Louvre, and I saw this piece, and I just said, I love it. it captures my feelings in all the right ways of that trip. And I'm grateful to have it. No, there's definitely a dialectic. There's definitely back and forth. I am learning so much from him about his process, about his thinking, about his framing, that, again, the piece takes on incredible layered meaning to me, because it's not just, did you stand there and take a picture? It's, how did you compose it? How did you think about it? When did you choose to do it? Even the reflections, with the water are very meaningful. So I'm learning and gaining a whole education along the way. Also, as a professor, I'm very open that I'm kind of nerdy and geeky, so I enjoy this very, very much, and I suspect a lot of us are kind of geeky that way and want to have that back and forth with the photographers. Other times we talk about our kids and life just generally, so it's more than just the image itself, but it's a relationship, a friendship, and then a great educational experience along the way.
So we're looking now at two works from your collection. Of course, Kit is, as you said,
Sure.
on the left. Can you tell us a little bit about what drew you to Kit's work in relation to kind of your interest in photography? Generally, of course, I'm pulling on earlier conversations you and I have had, and speaking about the Todd on the side.
So as a professor of politics and social science, I write a lot about geography and space and how space changes and alters relationships. There's great work in New York about that. The most busy corner in all of the city for people to meet up is the corner on Fifth Avenue where Saks happens to be. There's so much written about all of this. And while I'm trying to teach this, and I've been trying to do this for years, I find that sometimes students don't really understand what I'm saying or understand the texts. And I realized about a decade ago that we have photographers who've added so much to this dialogue and to this discourse. And I realized, my God, if we start bringing this into the classroom, which people amazingly don't, they're beginning to now, you can see their eyes open, you can see the wheels churning in their heads, and you realize a picture really is worth 1,000 words here. Things take on a life of their own. Another example here is on the right. This is an old image from Todd Webb. I used to live right around there, but what I like to do is I like to show that image and then what the area looks like today. It hasn't changed much, and it's a direct result of zoning and how the city has conceptualized the use of the space, and that obviously impacts the feel of the neighborhood. So it's again a really wonderful thing to be able to stand on the corner, take a photo of it with my phone, then show the two next to each other thanks to Todd Webb's image from well over 70 years ago, and it just brings everything to life. So that's just how I choose to collect and how I see these sorts of things.
So you have such a central theme to your collecting, and I'd love to bring Josh and Sophie into this now in terms of how we support emerging photographers with collectors and how sometimes these can be thematic collections. And so you can, as a gallerist or as with an institution, you can kind of direct the conversation, and what we're seeing in how that's been in both of your roles. First, of course, at Gagosian, it's a different beast than some of your past roles in institutions, and at Pace McGill, of course, and Sophie, you with Fotografiska and Magnum. How have you found, in terms of the similar avenues that Sam is talking about, in terms of supporting emerging photographers?
I guess we talked earlier about, one of the reasons we're doing this program, why I'm really passionate about it, is because I do believe that, it's a responsibility as an institution to support the arts. And for us, as a for-profit in the city, it felt like we had a unique position to be able to have conversations around the art market. Our membership we're called collectors patrons, so I really wanted to kind of encourage them to be collectors and patrons. And obviously, being a sort of, I guess, a mid-ranking museum space, when we had the building, we are known for showing predominantly contemporary. I mean, we mix it up with historical, but the majority of our shows have been contemporary practitioners. And I think, again, knowing that we're one of the sort of, smaller museums, we're sort of a responsibility to kind of, again, bring these lesser-known names into the ecosystem. I think it's really important. In London, where I spent most of my career, the Photographers Gallery has that role. It was a very contested role there, because it's been asked to do a lot of work in order to really sort of catalyze the sort of system of emerging and photographers, so they can then move on to go and have a show at the V&A or at the Tate, or so I mean, but obviously, we're still a little bit further down the tracks from a really just emerging photographer, and so I think that it's really nice to be able to introduce in different ways the work of younger photographers through even just our top floor, where we were having smaller shows, little projects, or talks. So, sometimes someone isn't ready to have a fully blown one floor exhibition, but you can kind of bring them in ways, for a group show or something like that. So I think everyone working in the arts space is very conscious of the need to feed and grow the community of artists that we work with.
I love the point you made about, your framing of Fotografiska showing contemporary but also historical. It reminds me of the fact that everything historical was once contemporary. So this Todd Webb, I'm not sure when that picture was taken. I'm guessing the 50s or 40s, 50s, 60s maybe, 50s. At one point that was a contemporary image. It doesn't look so contemporary now. But with the availability of information today, with social media, with the internet, it's hard to imagine a time when there were only 2 galleries in the city that showed photography, and that was not so long ago. The photography market, as it were, really starts in earnest in the 1970s, and the medium of photography is, it's less than 200 years old. So there was a time when you can imagine when the market starts in the 1970s, so many of the most important and historically important, significant practitioners were still alive. And they were still making prints, and they were struggling to make a market for those prints. And there were the galleries that came along and tried to make that market and to build a kind of collector base that could sustain that market, grow that market. And fast forward to now, 50 years later, we're in a different place. It's a much larger arena, and it's now not just photography, it's photography mixed in a hybrid fashion with other technologies, with other media. It's not so pure anymore. It's not so ghettoized as it used to be. But there's still incredible opportunities. I don't know if maybe this is a good time to forward to my slide. Yeah.
Oh, we're going to see some.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
First.
Well, yeah. We can go back to. Could we go back to yours? So, this is an old-looking photograph. It's from 1985. So, MoMA still does this series. I think it's biannual, called New Photography. But it started in 1985. This was the first iteration of it. Showed 4 photographers. It was, Zeke Berman, Antonio Mendoza, Judith Joy Ross, and Michael Spano. And they were all emerging. And for Judith Joy Ross, who I've had the privilege of working very closely with as a curator over the past several years, this was an incredibly important moment in her career. She grew up in the kind of industrial coal mining region of Pennsylvania, really had very little relationship with New York City. Philadelphia to her was a big, intimidating city. And here she is having a show at MoMA. It changed her career, changed her trajectory. At the time, the market for photography was very different. And we haven't talked numbers yet, but 1985, I don't know this for a fact, but I think prints were going for, I think you could get a really good picture for $1,000, like a really historically important picture for $1,000. Not just by Judith Joy Ross, but by sort of people we consider household names today. And if we keep going, and these are 2 of Judith's pictures, which are still fairly affordable. This is an artist by the name of Lucas Blaylock, who he teaches at Bard. These are two installation shots from a show from a little over 10 years ago. He was showing with a gallery in the Lower East Side called Ramekin and Crucible. They were a really, and they're still around, but at the time they were really upstart gallery. They had a marketing budget of zero. They got their collector base by word of mouth, and because they were doing such interesting off the wall stuff, I mean, it felt like you were in on a secret. Lucas, I came to know actually as a graduate student of James Welling's, and Jim Welling is now a very established photographer. He taught, he headed the MFA program at UCLA. Lucas was one of his students, and I was introduced to Lucas from Jim, and I saw Lucas a year later. We crossed paths, and he said, "Oh, hey, I'm having a show, and you want to come by?" I said, "Sure, good to see you again." And he gave me a tour of his show. I think it was the next day or the next couple of days. It just blew me away. And at the time, I mean, fast forward to now, he's had shows at MoMA. He's had major shows, internationally. He's seen as a kind of leader of contemporary photography, but then it was so exciting because you could see synapses firing, my own, his. We were having incredible conversations about the forefront of the medium, and I actually ended up personally buying something from the show. I'm not a collector. I don't collect. I mean, I don't. It's. I mean, I love pictures, but I was so compelled by that conversation that I just wanted to do something to show my conviction. And so I don't know if that maybe relates to one of the stories that, or one of the questions that you.
Well, I think what I would love to take as kind of a segue from what you were just speaking about is these interpersonal relationships and how much that goes into supporting these younger photographers, and how, yes, the gallery and the photographer literally invited you to that event, and from it you purchased something. So I think it does go kind of back into what the slide that we stepped by, of kind of how you've been able to create friendships with some of the photographers that you've created. And I'd love to hear more about that and switch back to your adorable anecdote.
Oh, sure. So I will tell you in 1 second. But just as a lead-in, when I first became really interested in landscape photography and photography about the built environment, some folks said, go to AIPAD. As a professor at Sarah Lawrence, we have a number of colleagues who are well-known photographers, and then they said, you'll enjoy that. And I'll be very open, and I'm open about it here. And I love AIPAD, so it's not meant to be mean. It was not a very nice experience. Many of the gallerists would not talk to me. Prices were not displayed openly. I'm not bashful. I'm happy to ask. But after a while, it's a little tiring to say, how much is that? How much is that? Can I afford this? It feels a little weird. As an academic, I don't have huge amounts of disposable income, but there's certain things I can potentially afford. And the good news is that 5 or 6 years later, after that first AIPAD experience, and I still remember walking into the Park Avenue Armory, and it was just magnificent with the big curved roof and just aisle and aisle after things to see and learn about. I took a little bit of a hiatus, but I still was really curious, so I was able to go back and get back into it. And what I'm very pleased to be able to say is that it is not nearly as stuffy. It is not nearly as homogenous in terms of who's working there, the people who are being shown. It's far more diverse in all the right ways. The price points are far more reasonable than they used to be. And not all the gallerists, I'm not going to say who, but many of the gallerists are very open. They actually like children if you bring your kids by. I have to, in many cases, bring them because finding some childcare is a little bit of a challenge. So anyway, this is just a fun little story of the Robert Mann Gallery in Caroline Wall, who's one of the managers there. They are incredibly open to kids, which I'm very much appreciative of, and they invited me to this Sig Harvey opening for her new series. I couldn't find any babysitting care at the time, so I brought my 3-year-old to her first gallery opening on a cold night about a year ago. And one of the photos, this is called Dahlias and Cake. For some reason, I don't know why, it was actually hanging very, very low. So we walk in, This is a gorgeous photo. And she goes right up to it and she starts counting the pieces of cake in the flowers. I'm walking around looking at the other work. It's not so big that I can't just move away a few feet and she's going to be fine. Next thing I know, I see Sig Harvey chatting with her. Sig has a daughter herself. Her daughter is regularly featured in her photos. And they had a very nice conversation, which was a real joy for me to watch. I don't know what it was about. My daughter still will not tell me. I can't assume it's not that deep being a three. She was a 3-year-old, but I had purchased the book in advance to have it signed. It was not signed to me. It was signed to my daughter, Natalie. I no longer have this book. This book is under her bed, and she reads this book religiously every morning when she gets up. And
A young collector.
Yes, exactly. We purchased that photo. What was really appreciated was that it was reasonable. It came in 3 different sizes, a number of editions. So this was not a $10,000 photo, but a couple $1,000s. And I said, all right, now I have to get this. And it's not like you were pulling my arm. Anyone was pulling my arm. It's a gorgeous piece. And then we went to AIPAD in the spring, and a much larger version of this was there. And Sig was there for one of the days. And my in-laws were visiting. We went because we're not too far from the Armory. And again, it's a wonderful day out. And we walked by, and my daughter goes, "That's my friend, and that's my friend's painting." She doesn't really photo, but she calls it a painting, but she close enough. And we now have this great relationship with Ms. Harvey, who's up in Maine. She and I are connected over Instagram. I get occasional notes. I know what's up with her family and snow and all that other good stuff. And when the blueberries are ready to go, and I share things. And does she need to do this? Probably not. But does it bring incredible meaning to me and to my daughter and to the family? Absolutely. I'm not going to get this to keep this photo when my daughter moves out for college or meets somebody and moves into her own place. It's going with her, which is a bummer, but it's beautiful. And again, that's sort of the thing that's changed. AIPAD is not old the same way it used to be. It's not nearly as, it's not stuffy. Things are more affordable. And I really want to say very publicly thank you to the gallerists who are working really hard to find, now I don't think Sig Harvey's emergent exactly, but to find artists who are, quite frankly, friendly, looking to have those connections. Certainly you can deal in the older material too, but the relationships are real and they're very powerful.
But I think, at some point Sig was, right? And
Yes.
and I'm sure she remembers that moment. And I think this is a really good, actually, opportunity for us to speak a little bit more about what it's like to purchase a photo. And this is Collecting for Everyone. We're hoping that this is new audiences for collecting photo. And I'd love to talk a little bit more about where you can look for emerging photographers. And we've talked a little bit about social media. It came up very briefly, but I'd love to expand on that. And also speaking about the galleries. And I think AIPAD, along with so many art fairs and so many gallerists in the current market, have long recognized that the intimidation factor can be that first barrier to purchase, that the art world has its own reputation for being stuffy or for being more formal, or if you have to ask, you can't afford it kind of mentality. And that is changing, and that's changing both with the more established generation of gallerists, but also certainly with our associate members and with the younger galleries who have come up with that intimidation factor. So, we've talked a little bit about Michael Hewlett, and obviously we have, there are many different galleries in AIPAD and many different galleries and avenues to purchase photography. But I'd love to talk, kind of all three of you, about various ways that you've found the best way to actually collect emerging photography, whether as an advisor, as a gallerist, and how you would advise them to do so. And if we're talking about digital purchasing, I'm giving you a lot, and I'll come back to some of these things, but what are some of the questions they should be asking? You talked about 3 different sizes of editions. So I'd like to speak a little bit more about that so that if anyone in our audience wants to leave here and buy a photograph, they know how.
I mean, there's so many different avenues, really. I was just thinking about, like during COVID, obviously social became massive as a platform. It always has been, but there are very particular things like the Artist Support Pledge that became very important in that period, where you could, collecting emerging photographers, you tend to be also an emerging collector. I think there's a sort of relationship in a way between that. I certainly enjoyed the Artist Support Pledge and the fact that you were spending £200 or something on a print. You can afford to make mistakes at that level. And I think it is also about learning, isn't it? The process, and you are going to make mistakes along the way. So I think, if it's that kind of level, I think it's okay to to risk it a little bit, but it's always good to then look at where that work is, look at that artist's page, whether they're represented, all of that kind of thing. Something I mentioned when we were talking about this yesterday was there are lots of interesting places to find work that maybe aren't so obvious as well. Like I've, in my professional capacity, been a portfolio reviewer in a number of places. There's a lot of 501c3s that offer artists' prints. I mean, actually quite a lot of established galleries here and in, museums from the sort of American perspective also offer limited edition prints. I mean, I've got Thomas Roof that I bought from the Whitechapel about 15 years ago. I'm so chuffed I got that picture, but it was like $1,500 because it was a much bigger. It was one image. It was a much bigger edition, but it was a very exciting opportunity. And I think museums are very conscious also, as I said before, of trying to encourage accessible price points. And you get big names, but you also get in the mix of that lesser known. And I think it's about being thoughtful about the places you can look. We were talking about eBay, we were talking about auctions. Galleries are wonderful because you have that, they shepherd you, and you have the access to the artist, I guess, through that relationship that perhaps is not so easy in other ways. But if you're exploratory, there's plenty of opportunity.
As part of the conversation that we had yesterday when we were speaking about galleries and other avenues, of course, purchasing from a gallery comes with a little bit of more security. But when we're speaking about emerging collectors and emerging photographers, one of the definitions was not represented. So you might not even be able to find them at a gallery. And with that, I think still comes the question of what do you need to know? So if you take that risk on eBay or Etsy or auction, you never know what a condition report says. What are some of those things that we could advise for that?
I just wanted to say how I loved what you both said about that conviction you feel. I think some of it's about gut. I mean, I know there's a whole load of other things we need to talk about here in terms of the practicalities, right? But I actually also think it's about...
I don't, if we don't get into those minor details, I think that so much of collecting photography is also about this gut. It's about the response. I mean, it's about this. It's about the community and the emotive resonance of photography.
And wanting to support that creative person's progress. What you said about that exhibition, how you were just drawn to commit to buying something because you felt passionate about their project. And I think that's something you shouldn't be scared of. And I think it's about learning, because ultimately you're going to be living with that work. So if you don't, and I think everyone feels that at some point, that sort of drive to, I must have, or I must, And I think that's a really fascinating part of the psychology of collecting or supporting, in fact, emerging artists.
Josh, I'd love for you to speak on kind of how you, as a gallerist, how you've also been able to shepherd artists on the other side of this.
Yeah, I mean, I got my start actually as a would-be emerging photographer, or trying to emerge photographer, never quite made it. But that's my background. And so in my various roles, I've made it my personal mission to be accessible, to answer, no question is too naive or too, quote unquote, stupid. I mean, yes, there are a number of colleagues in the field who maybe don't have quite the same approach, but keep asking, and you'll find someone. If you show your passion, if you demonstrate your passion, we're all human beings at the end of the day. We all want to relate to somebody else or to something else. And also at the end of the day, the community of photographers, of photo dealers, of people involved in photography, it's in the scope of the other media in the art world, we kind of have the reputation of being the most approachable and the most down to earth and most friendly, just because photography is a lot of things. Yes, it can be fine art, but it's also documentary. It can be snapshots. It can be a lot of things, and so photography always has that as part of its DNA. And so I think Yeah, I think it's important to not be afraid and to just ask questions, and find someone eventually that, if you're really passionate about it, you will find someone that will show you the way. I think it's not that difficult to find a mentor, to find someone that wants to pass along their knowledge, their know-how, their experience. I will say that I'll make a plug for a fantastic website, available to all. It's called Collector Daily, and it's run by a fellow named Loring Knobloch, who's made it his personal mission to see every photography exhibition in New York and review it. I mean, it's an incredibly ambitious project, especially in light of the fact that a lot of the mainstream outlets, magazines, newspapers have stopped reviewing exhibitions regularly, especially photography exhibitions. So just by reading those entries, and there's discussion about price points and the markets a little bit, you can actually learn a lot about the culture of the photography world without having to step foot into a gallery, and so you can feel well armed when you do step into a gallery and ask questions.
If I could jump into additional things to all of that, and this comes from the professor side of it. And one of the things I tell my students is, I said, pretend you're on an airplane. If you encounter no turbulence, you're probably not moving. You have to have a little bit of bumps, meaning you're going forward, and you're going to make mistakes. You're going to have some ups and downs, and my wife will probably see this video, but I have quite a few pieces that are stashed somewhere that I've made mistakes on over the years. And I'm okay with that. This is how we learn. So you have those bumps, you have a little bit of turbulence. It's not always smooth. I've purchased things that have not been of the quality that I've liked, and so on and so forth. But it's also taught me to ask certain questions. And we're not talking about tens of thousands of dollars. We're talking about hundreds of dollars here in a similar sort of way. So I think that's been great. The other thing that I'd mention, especially when finding emerging or emergent photographers, is look to our BFA and MFA programs. They're everywhere. We have a lot of them. And if you praise a MFA student, in many cases, you've done as I say to my kids, you've helped fill their bucket for the day. It's amazing when you pay interest and take interest in someone's work. And I don't mean this in a patronizing way at all. There's so many passionate, talented people in and around the New York City area, not to mention across this country and all over the world. And they want to be recognized. They want to be appreciated. They want to be seen. And they're open. They all have very, very, robust, not all of them, but so many of them have robust socials that are open and accessible. They'll invite you to the studios or to the schools. You don't have to be a professor to do it. But every time I see something online from a student and I reach out to them, I get an almost, instantaneous response. I'd love to show you my work. Come on over. And I love it. And if I can give them a few bucks for a piece that I think is cool, they're happy to sell it in many cases. Hopefully that helps them buy some nice dinner or whatever later. They feel good, and it's a beautiful symbiotic sort of relationship. And being in New York's really attractive for that because we have so much of this. So thank you for
Yes.
stimulating that response.
I'd also just like, I think we'd all be remiss to not suggest looking through books. Remember those things, books? A lot of photographers who are emerging might not have gallerists. For many of them, their dream is to have their work collected, edited, seen, absorbed, digested in a book form. There's something about photography that lends itself to being understood in that way. And so, there's the New York Public Library where I used to work. There's great, among the many great bookstores in New York, there's Dashwood Books in NeueHouse. You can just go in there and browse, and you see something you like, note the name of the photographer, and look them up. It shouldn't be that hard to find them. But that's another sort of, in the sea of options and images, it's a way to sort of cut through and see things that have been distilled in terms of their presentation.
I love that mention of Dashwood. Actually, they were on our panel for collecting photo books just in these 4 seats about 2 months ago. But I think actually that's a great, we hadn't even discussed photo books when we were preparing for this panel, but it's actually a great segue into Tyler, who we had hoped to talk about, because so much of his growth came out of a participation in a famous photo book. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about kind of how you've been working with him at Gagosian and what that has been like, and kind of bringing him from an emerging photographer to quite an established one now, and I think rather a big name.
Yeah. So maybe not everyone here is familiar with Tyler Mitchell, but he's a 29-year-old phenom, one of the most in-demand names in the world of editorial and fashion. He just joined Gagosian formally last fall. And let's see what's on here. Okay. And so we debuted his representation at the gallery with a presentation at Paris Photo back in November, where we paired his work in conversation with that of Richard Avedon. And actually, we didn't do it. This was Tyler. We invited him to curate this booth and to think through Avedon's work through his lens and his perspective. And that's something that I think was important for us and also important for Tyler. If one was maybe unsure about his potential as an artist to that would sort of stay on the scene, when one sees his work with an established name like Richard Avedon, you could see that his work stands up and compares quite well. And there was we had some wonderful panels, wonderful. It sparked just incredible conversation, and we had questions from people who had never thought of these two figures in the same conversation, and it was meant to be a provocation. I mean, I will say that the price points are very different, and we ended up being quite successful with this presentation in terms of sales. Sold out several editions. So I think for someone like Tyler, one of the things that he established before even coming to Gagosian is small editions. And the history of editing in photography is a very interesting one. But these days, I think it's pretty important if you want to have a sustainable market to keep your editions low. So Tyler's editions are generally editions of 3 with 2 artist proofs, and in some cases they're unique. So if we go on to next slide. So this one was an edition of 3. This one we sold out of, I think, on the first day. It's difficult to tell on this slide, but the picture, larger picture on the far left and the smaller picture on the far right, those are photographs that are printed on glass, and they're backed with mirror. So all of the sort of white areas, the light areas of the print, when you look at it, you see your own reflection, and that's something that Tyler started experimenting with a couple of years ago, and was experimenting with, including 2 mirror works in this display, and he treats them as unique objects. They're one of a kind, no artist proofs. So the people that bought them can have that confidence that they're the only ones that have them. And speaking about being influential, I think the response to the mirror works was so strong that we're having our first major presentation. It's not been announced officially yet, but it'll be soon. And I think I wouldn't be surprised if we saw more mirror works in that exhibition.
Thank you so much for sharing a little bit more about Tyler. And I think that it's interesting to hear of someone, when we first started this conversation and defining emerging, we said definitely not young, but he's somebody who moved very quickly from emerging to getting pretty established at a relatively young age. So he might not be the best one to make the argument for the other ages that we discussed, but I think that it's interesting to see the trajectory of an artist and to understand kind of when you're looking at those photo books and when you're looking at these portfolio prizes or MFAs, that getting to know an artist and a photographer at that early stage it's really can be so satisfying to watch their trajectory and to have known that no, it's not because of you, but you supported it, and that can be like that can be a very meaningful relationship. And I imagine, is part of what we spoke about with Kit.
Was Tyler in the new Black Vanguard exhibition by Aperture? Because I wanted to mention that when you talked about his ascent.
Well, his
book,
one of his photograph was on the cover.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
Famous.
he was one of many portfolios in that book.
Because Aperture is another place that have been so great at really developing the ecosystem of younger artists and photographers, and I think that is a phenomenon as well. That particular exhibition has gone to so many different countries now. It's kind of crazy, but when it began as a summer show, I think, and it was really not conceived. They didn't know that it would catch fire in the way that it did. So if you were lucky enough, and again, I think one could comfortably say quite a lot of the photographers in that show were at that point emerging, but I don't think any of them are now. So I think it's like, again, it's following your instinct a little bit, but also maybe knowing the places that are kind of known to catalyze talent or bring it to the fore.
Well, I actually think that's a very nice place for us to end the conversation, unless any of the rest of you have any last anecdotes you want to add. But I have a feeling that with this, sorry, please.
No, I would just add, collect what you love and what turns you on here and here. It's what I say to all of my students, because you never know what's going to pop, like that work or not. If it does, great, and you've found a piece that ends up being very valuable, but I have things that will probably not be worth very much, but I adore them. And at the end of the day, I hate to say it since it's about collecting, it's about you and what you like.
There's also a certain righteousness when you do purchase an emerging an emerging photographer, and that it's so good, but nobody else knows yet. It's a little bit of that, like, well, you haven't heard of him yet, but you don't.
The number that pop is still sadly too small. That at the end of the day, if you're not lucky enough to have someone who then deserves the credit that they ultimately earn, you still want to love the piece. And
absolutely, and you get to then also get to promote it and get to be a part of that. But I imagine with this panel, we're going to have a lot of questions. So we'd love to open it up now to our audience for questions for Sam, Josh, or Sophie. And we have a microphone that we'll hand around. If you want to raise your hand, and I will call on you. I'm sorry, the lights are quite... Well, okay, there we go.
Oh, thank you very much. Josh, I was thinking about something, and I was going to make a comment, and you just hit on the topic. I was given advice many years ago by a mentor who suggested to me in the complete opposite direction of collecting, and that was focus. Pick a theme or something that you really enjoy, and because you're going to come across many things that you're going to want to buy. But if you focus and put your money towards a directive, that once you build your collection, as personally I have some that could be $500, some that could be worth many thousands of dollars, but altogether, it's a very, in my opinion, impressive overall collection without it being very varied. And it gave me the enjoyment for the hunt to try to find more to go into that category.
Yeah, I mean, the advice I'd give any serious person that has a serious curiosity or serious interest is to focus. Absolutely, I agree with that. I mean, we all who doesn't love a good rabbit hole to go down, and I think that really an important part of this whole process is like it's discovery that then can lead to self-discovery. I mean, it's like you become just through curiosity, it can just lead you in directions that you never would have expected in the beginning. That's what's so exciting, and to know that maybe you're the only one that's thinking about the world or images in that way is also really exciting. So some of the best photography collections that have ever been formed have been thematic. Thinking about Henry Buell's collection based on, they're all pictures that had to do with the hand. And it is an incredible collection.
So in the ecosystem of this photography, and actually other arts as well, sort of figurative arts, you have this concept of the artist and the gallerist, right? So at the beginning of your career, maybe it's the artist and the gallerist, but by the end, it's the artist, the gallerist, the agent, the agent, the manager, right? And a whole other cast of characters. So being this time of year, you can look and you can see all sorts of open calls for like artists or a curatorial development. There's not a lot in that sort of development of the manager agent space. I weirdly am interested in this for my own personal reasons. But like, what do you think as the gallerist is like really interesting ways to go about training for those?
Training
For like the sort of more business-minded aspects that like the gallerist, yes, still gets respected as creative in some way, but the agent and the manager don't. And they're still as connected to the artist. And it's just as important that all these feelings we've expressed are related to them, right? But you don't see the same sort of development for those kind of guys.
I think you might see that changing in the next several years. There's a rise in the sort of artist manager, artist agent, and that's
But that's what I'm saying.
it's trending.
Are you interested in, or you think those development paths are being made?
Oh, definitely.
Okay.
And well, they're being forged by people who really see an opportunity to create value, to
Right.
create focus. And a lot of times artists, I think a lot of people are recognizing that it is a missing layer of the ecosystem that could be made stronger and help to rebalance things.
I mean, I worked at Magnum for 17 years, and that is an agency. So, and definitely I do hear you in terms of we were the sort of behind the scenes people a little bit, but there was a lot of pleasure in that as well. And the relationship that you had, I mean, I guess in a way it's like the studio manager, you're sort of a very trusted partner. And you're thinking about how to develop and help those photographers in lots of different ways, commercially as well as sort of, I mean, my job sat across exhibitions, books, print sales, education. So you're thinking lots of different buckets in terms of how they are evolving to that point. I do think it's something that is kind of, people are seeing the sort of strength in that diversification of being associated with an agent that can kind of manage them across a whole realm of different areas of the market, I guess. And that's one of the interesting things about photography also, is that it is, a communication medium as well as an art form. But I mean, there's been photography agents for a long time. I think there is a trendiness now to certain big kind of, there's a couple of Hollywood art.
That's what I was going to say, is that, I mean, a couple of the big Hollywood agencies now have fine art departments. And so I think the pathways are there in terms of development for them. I think that it's too nascent of a specific role, that it's still a little bit by the bootstraps and kind of figuring out their own way from, unless you're with an agency, and kind of working your way up that way. I can't think of a photography agency fellowship. Thank you. Yes. Oh, okay. Our next is over here.
Thank you so much for sharing tonight. This is for all of you. I'm curious to know about the impact of an image of a photographer, emerging photographer, and also in terms of, do you gravitate to the image immediately and exclude the sort of literary aspect of the photographer in terms of the statement? How much do you read into the statement of the images, and how important is that? For example, one of my favorite photographers, God bless him, is Larry Sultan, and his photographs of his parents. And when you look at those images, you don't have to have an explanation. So maybe you could share about your thoughts about the so-called statement of the photographer. Thank you.
That's a whole other panel discussion. Photographs and images. Photographs and text, rather, and the relationship between the two. But no, I mean, I think an image should stand by itself.
I think if we're as you said, that could be its own panel, of course, and I think could be many things. It could be a whole exhibition. It could be an entire program. But if we take that question centered on kind of what we're talking about today in terms of the collecting emerging photographers, I think it is so much, at least for me now, I'm a beginning collector of photography. I need to be completely awestruck by the image, and then I want to learn about the artist. Who created this? How did that come to be for them, and what inspired it? And then, if there's something incredibly disturbing about the story, it might change how I view that. If there's something incredibly heartwarming about the story, if, Sig was telling me about how those cakes were actually, that might make me love it even more. So I think especially with emerging photographers where you're not entering into collecting them, and again, this is just my personal thought, with kind of the history and press narratives and all of these things that are put on to mid-career or further career emerging, you just need to love the image and you need to want to live with it. And then the other parts are vital, but it's not what's going to get me to purchase one. So sorry.
I think if we're thinking about the ecosystem, I mean, now that I'm on the sort of artist and sort of, I guess, content presentation side of things, actually having an artist, emerging artist, a young artist, write their own artist statement, I mean, most of them don't want to do it. And that the fact that they do it is can be significant, even if you don't, not everyone agrees with what they think about their own work. I mean, artists, I think, are not necessarily the authorities on their own work, but I think that it can be for the artist a kind of more than an exercise, a commitment, a stake in what you think your work is about. And so I think I agree with Lydia. I think we probably all agree with Lydia. I mean, in order for images to really impact, I mean, I think we want to be impacted by the visual first, and that will lead us by curiosity to learn more about the background, the backstory, the narrative, whatever. But I think to go deeper, when you develop a relationship with an artist, when you see them follow the sort of fulfill the sort of arc of their careers, it can be really fulfilling, really interesting to go back to those early statements and to see how they hold up. Because it's all about kind of, in a way, how you present yourself.
So at Sarah Lawrence, we actually talk about this sort of stuff all the time. I strongly believe that it needs to be a strong, visceral, immediate reaction. I either like the work or I don't. We also try to make students write things. They are often very hesitant. It's not that they can't write. It's that they don't want to define the work necessarily. They don't want to prejudice the work. They don't want to bias the responses. And I've been helping students write statements like this for, I'm so old now, almost 15 years. It's weird to say that. In many cases, they don't want to do it because they want you to take from the work what you take from the work. I don't know if this is true or not. There was this scene in The Crown, and I don't believe I'm referring to popular press, where you had, I think it was now King Charles talking to the Apollo astronauts about the deep meaning they had, and it was a great episode because the astronauts took no meaning, or seemingly took no meaning, from the things that character saw as just simply awesome. They were just having fun, and how do they land and how do they fly the thing. And I remember watching that vividly, and I don't watch a lot of TV, so this one just happened to strike me because it relates to this enterprise of art, which is, again, so many of the students that I work with who are BFA, MFA types don't want to tell you what they're thinking about. You take it for what it is, and you put your own biases and preferences on it, and to manipulate it might actually be antithetical to the work itself. There's no, of course, right answer on this. If you want to come to Sarah Lawrence, we could talk about it for 14 weeks, if you like. I'm happy to do that. But no, that's just my quick and dirty take on that.
We have, thank you for that great question. We have another over here, I believe, yes.
Yeah, sorry. I'm like tucked away in the corner here. It seems obvious to me that collecting an emerging photographer is not about making money based on what everyone's saying here, that you buy with your heart. But it also came up that someone made a mistake purchasing an emerging photographer, and maybe quality of image was the problem. But is it also the case that you buy a work that you were once in love with, and like relationships, you fall out of love, and that was the problem? Or I'd love to talk about the mistakes or what you should know to ask before you buy an emerging photographer, like quality discussions.
Sam, I think
Sure.
that's you.
So I didn't fall out of love with the work in and of itself. But, when you see a small image online, you don't necessarily know the paper it's printed on. You don't know the quality of the print. You don't know, was it printed with some form of printer? Was it done in a lab in a more traditional way? Was it done by hand? Was it photoshopped? Again, all of those sorts of things. So I have a piece, for instance, that was not printed on the right sort of paper, with the right chemicals, and within a year, the image basically, like Back to the Future, faded away, which can happen. And I didn't think to ask. I didn't look into that. The person who sold it to me didn't have the money to buy the better stuff and afford the papers at the time, which is, by the way, surprisingly expensive to get some of the Ilford and other sorts of papers. So it's stuff like that I encourage people to ask for, and ask to see, even just ask them to take a picture of the image on their cell phone, so it's not as professional, but that you can get a better sense of what exactly am I buying, what size is it, how bright or vivid is it, and so on. I think you guys are better at laying out what's necessary to check. But I've bought things that I thought were going to be on photo paper, but were printed on some other sort of rice paper, which did not hold up very well. And when I took it out of the envelope, tore apart. Things like that. So for me, at least, it's not that I fell out of love with the work in and of itself, but I would say the medium and the presentation of the work. So these are things we want to definitely ask. And how many copies are you going to make? Is it an open run? Is it a limited run? And things like that.
Thank you. I believe we have somebody right next to you.
Me?
Oh, no? Oh.
Well, no, I wasn't going to, but I can.
And that's why New York is awesome.
So, I'm taking notes here, but so number one, you have to love it. And to me, you buy with your heart, as all of you have said. And then I think you buy with your brain, you buy with your head. And I think, to Sam, to what you were just saying, you just have to know the questions to ask. But when you're dealing with emerging versus more established, I think there's a little bit more leeway. I think that you do fall out of love. I was looking at, I think, Sam, there was an artist that you had I think you showed in the MoMA show. I fell out of love and got rid of that work, and maybe I shouldn't have. And we all make mistakes. There's some big ones I've made. So I've been collecting 40 years, and you see the ups and downs. But what a wonderful industry! I just want to compliment all of you that it's a community of people who really care. It's a very different community than, I'm going to call it, the art world versus the photo world. It's just. AIPAD is just the stellar. That's your schoolyard, is to go to AIPAD and walk and look. Don't show your work.
And it's a nice schoolyard.
But it's just so fabulous. So anyhow, I wasn't going to say anything. So thanks.
Do we have any other questions? I just want to make sure. Sorry, it's quite bright. Oh, okay.
Is that me? Yeah. Hi. So thank you so much for such an informative talk. That was really nice to hear more insight. As an emerging photographer who has gone the BFA and MFA route, who literally was just in Chelsea yesterday seeing all of the shows that are Irving Penn and Pete Turner and all of these well-established photographers, it can feel really disheartening to try to figure out, how do I find a benefactor? How do I find a collector that wants to invest in me? Because I know where I'm going, So for photographers, for artists, what is the best way for us to get our work seen by gatekeepers of collecting? Because I know you had mentioned social media, so it's do I just run a print sale? I've never done that before. I've never thought to do that. Do I make a book? I apply, endlessly. We all do. So I think I'm a little bit at a loss of it's hard to know where to go from here. You know what I mean?
Well, you've got an audience of
right.
people who.
Can you tell us what your handle
Yes.
is?
I was
gonna
We'll
say,
look
what's your
yeah,
Instagram
we'll
handle?
look you up.
Okay, well, I didn't expect Emma Rose Milligan. EMMAROSEMILLIGAN.
There you go.
If you want to really
Attend lectures about.
right, yes. If you want a really interesting story, I just did one on a $12,000 eye surgery for Wall Street Journal. That was beautiful. But anyways, yep. Didn't expect that. Sorry.
Josh, I think you actually had some.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I've worn a few different hats in this field, and the market it's not comprehensive, right? Yes, it's I think it's valid to think of it as gatekeeping, but part of the challenge on the gallerist dealer side is how do you create and sustain a market? That's really hard, and it's especially hard now. So, I mean, I think the reason why you maybe see more today, more established names being shown over and over again, because that's what will pay the rent, and that's just a market reality. It doesn't mean that if you're not represented by a gallery in New York, you're not worth your work isn't worth seeing. I mean, I think this what you just said, like you know where you're going. If you keep going, you'll find an audience. Right, and there was a time before, as I said before, there was a time before a market, and I think we're heading to a time when, I mean, things are changing rapidly right now in the landscape of photography galleries, photography, magazine. There's one left, I think, and so that can be both unsettling for people used to the way things were, but also an amazing opportunity.
We have one last question right here.
Okay.
Hi, as a young collector, for me, when I'm looking for young emerging photographers, I always go to New York Times Year in Review because there I have found many beautiful images that have spoken to me, and I got in touch with them through Jeffrey Hansen Scales and bought some images. And I just think that's a beautiful way to also keep yourself on top of what's happening and buy these young people's work. Thank you.
Thank you. The one thing I just wanted to say also is you mentioned Chelsea, and I think so much of Chelsea, if we talk, this vaunted conversation we had yesterday, we talked about some real estate questions in New York, but also Lower East Side in Brooklyn. I mean, that's where you're really seeing, or at least where I'm seeing, the kind of more emerging photographers being shown. I think the Chelsea, although, Robert Mann's in Chelsea now with SIG and with Drift, and so I'm wrong. Never mind. Okay. I think we did have one more question if we have time. Okay.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you, everyone. This might be a more niche question, but as an avid follower of Fotografiska and also visited all 3 days of AIPAD the past year, I think I've seen more studio as well as fine art photography versus street or documentary photography in the collector's world. As an emerging street photographer, hoping to also be represented by galleries and also publishing books one day. Wanted to hear from your perspective, what's your view when it comes to collecting documentary / street photography, and why, is this category actually having a larger market that I'm not seeing from the major art shows?
Well, we just had a big series of street photography exhibitions. That was our last series of exhibitions before we shut the building at Fotografiska. That was
Vivian Meyer.
Vivian Meyer, Brice Gilden, Jean-Andre Antoine upstairs. ICP is just closing its massive show on street photography. So street photography is one of those, and it's such a massive, it kind of drives me a bit nuts actually, because it's one of those huge umbrella titles.
I'm pretty sure it's actually going to be a subject of one of our future talks because it's such a
What
big...
about more contemporary?
It's a very big topic, and it kind of filters into documentary and various other things. I mean, my entire career has been in documentary photography, really. So it's hugely important, and I think remains thus. And when you get transcendent documentary, real life photographed and made into something, I mean, there's a real magic to that. And again, I think it's very broad. I love that you mentioned the New York Times. It's a fantastic bastion of documentary photography. So I wouldn't fear working in that way. It plays into the slipperiness of photography, though, because it becomes that sort of work can sit in an editorial space as well as a gallery space. But that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing for you if you're trying to make your way as a photographer.
And I think with so much, to use a word from one of your forthcoming books, polarization and the different ways that people are looking at kind of street photography these days, I think about Monroe Gallery at AIPAD had a fantastic series of documentary and street photography that was really powerful, and I'm still considering buying one. So I think, as you said, the market is there, but it's a niche, and it is just like any other architectural piece, architectural or floral or thematic piece. It is there. So.
I have one more question here.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask if you would repeat the name of the website that had reviews of.
Oh yeah, it's called Collector Daily, all one word, collectordaily.com.
Thank you.
Well, I want to thank my panelists, and Sophie, again, thank you for this collaboration, but thank you all for joining us tonight.